Hey everyone, welcome back to our Fireside Chats, MustardHub Voices Behind the Build, where we talk with people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes. My guest today is Andrew Nielsen. Andrew is General Counsel at MyHRCounsel. He can convey complex HR and employment law issues to executives, human resource professionals, and salespeople alike. Having handled more than 100 trials, he enjoys using that experience to help clients avoid litigation by taking a proactive approach to avoid problems before they arise. Welcome to Behind the Build, Andrew.
Thanks very much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I know that I'm about to get a schooling here. You had actually mentioned that one of your hobbies is the law. So,
Yes.
you're into reading, you're into this. Quick question about where those intersect. Any favorite judicial decisions or case law?
Oh man, I love say what you will about his political bent. I love reading opinions from Scalia. Rest in peace. His writing just had uh, such a biting, acerbic wit to it. Like he was super intelligent, and he would just write these opinions that had these digs in them against either other justices or some of the parties in the case, and just reading them. I don't know, I'm probably a dork for saying this. I would just bust out laughing. I remember con law 2, my buddy Alex and I were just like reading a case, and it's not a funny case, it was a death penalty case.
Oh,
um,
wow.
and he just had this one liner in there, and like we just started busting out laughing in class.
So,
And yeah, so I love reading Scalia. I love reading Posner opinions. um,
okay. When did you know that you wanted to be a lawyer, or is there something else that you thought you would do when you grew up?
Yeah, I went to undergrad, EW La Crosse. I was going to be a physical therapist, like 90% of the people that went there back in the 90s. It was
Hmm.
before they turned it into a doctorate program. And so it was really, really hard to get into the master's program at La Crosse. And it ended up being easier, it turned out, to get into med school, probably. And so I switched from being pre-physical therapy to pre-med. Um, and I was a dual philosophy pre-med major, and I took the MCAT, I took the GRE. I had no intention of going to law school whatsoever. And after I took the MCAT, I kind of thought about, do I want to go to med school? I also had applied to graduate schools in philosophy to do some applied ethics, and I thought about med school is like, I don't know if I really have it in me to make that commitment right now. And for philosophy grad school, I was like, there's not a ton of jobs in philosophy. It's not like there's a philosophy factory down the street where you can just get a job afterwards. And so
Right.
I punted on both of them, and I went to work. Actually, really, probably about 7 blocks that way through my window at a bank, doing mortgage foreclosures. And so that was my first real exposure to the law. Um, so I basically was the guy who sent you nasty letters, gave you nasty phone calls, said your mortgage is behind, and
Hmm.
then would knock on your door and say we're going to foreclose. Um,
That's a pretty circuitous route. So then, how did you get into HR law as a specialty?
Yeah, that actually is a real interesting story too. I was running a team of about 13 attorneys, and we all served one client. And what happened is that I was kind of growing out of that role, and I had kind of had that down pat, and it was kind of running. The team kind of ran itself at that point, and I was quite honestly a little bored. And my boss at the time said, "Hey, we're looking for someone that can handle these HR and employment law questions, and we don't have anybody. Who on your team would you recommend do it?" And I said, "Me. I want to do it. That sounds fun." And so that began what was originally called the HR Help Desk, which was kind of a terrible name. Uh, Started real small. We were doing phone calls. I don't know. I think it was like $50 a call. It was a real weird billing method,
Uh-huh.
and it started to gain some traction. And this is probably about 2010, 2009-ish, and it just kind of took off. And my now boss, Mark, came to the firm and said, "You know what? I've got a better idea for how to market this and for how to package this and how to bundle it." And he did. And it took off. We relabeled as MyHRCounsel. We stayed incubated within that law firm for a couple of years. And then we split off on our own about, uh, 2021. We, emerged from our cocoon.
So that's what brought you to my HR counsel. That makes a little bit of sense now. So tell me more about, I guess, my HR counsel. What maybe you can help to explain to everybody, what does my HR counsel do, and tell me maybe what kind of customers that you traditionally work with.
Yeah. So we're an online on-demand law firm, for lack of a better word. Um, and we're subscription based at a PEPM rate per employee per month. You pay us a flat rate, and we have a system. It's called Ask, and you submit questions via our portal. And anything from hiring to firing, everything in between, we answer those questions online. There's a phone app. You can use your phone, um, and it's a flat fee. So unlike traditional law firms, where you call an attorney and you bill a minimum of 15 minutes, and then they have to research, and you don't know how much it's going to be each month or each issue. There's a lot of cost certainty with us. You know what you're going to get. You got questions, we got answers. And there's not going to be hit with a surprise bill at the end of the month where the price goes up. Um, Very rarely do I tell somebody that that's not something that we can do or that's included. Um, Obviously, like going to court is something that would be excluded because that's pretty time consuming and costly. But from in terms
Mhm.
of legal advice aspect, um, if you got questions, we got answers, and we're probably going to cover everything that you have coming at us underneath your monthly subscription. And our sweet spot is, I mean, we have employers, I think our smallest employer has two, like the owner and one employee, up to, a medical insurance company that's got thousands of employees. Um,
Oh wow, okay.
our sweet spot, though, is probably that low to mid tier small business um, that doesn't have in-house counsel, or that doesn't have a super large HR function,
Mhm.
because that's where we can come in and we can kind of sit shoulder to shoulder with them and help them out as they have questions, or we can be their backstop if things pop up and they're like, I don't even know where to start, because
Yeah.
we've
No,
probably
that
seen it already.
that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like the human powered law chat GPT. If there was not AI, but there were like people behind, like the wizard behind the curtain answering those questions as you type them in. So as you work with your clients, I mean, what are some of the common HR issues? What we like to call maybe people problems that you see
Mhm.
with these small businesses.
A lot of them are going to be the issues that I see are leave, be it ADA leave or FMLA leave. That's a
Hmm.
perennial
Okay.
top three. Those two are going to be in our top three every year. Um,
Wow.
and it becomes tricky because, you know, um, people call FMLA, sometimes they call it the Friday, Monday Leave Act, because, people are intermittent leave and they like, oh, I need Friday and Monday off for my FMLA. And how do you manage that? How do you manage those people that may or may not be abusing the system, right? Um, and how do you do it legally in a way that protects you, that doesn't get you sued for FMLA
Hmm.
retaliation or discrimination. So those are a lot of those are always evergreen issues for us.
Oh, are there other? So outside of FMLA, which I can totally see, um, you see other things kind of come up a lot about remote work accountability, employment classification, things like that that come up, or not so often.
Yeah, remote work actually has been creeping up in terms of an issue lately. I've had a bunch of employers come to me um, and basically indicate that they don't think their employees are, pulling their weight anymore because they're working remote.
Right.
And I can see that. I understand how that works. I've been remote since, probably 2017-ish. Um, so I was remote before it was cool, before the pandemic. Um, and I can see the struggle, with accountability if you're not in the office, right?
Right.
If you're not there and you're like, oh, you know, look out the window, my lawn needs to get mowed. Maybe I'll go do that right now instead of work on this spreadsheet. It's human nature to try to avoid things and to procrastinate things that are either unexciting, or that they don't know how to do, or that they're scared they're going to screw up. And so the issue I find is that it has been popping up more, surprisingly more lately. So it was 25. It's 5 years past all the start of the work from home, I guess,
Yeah, just
revolution.
the whole movement.
Yeah. Um, and so it's kind of interesting to me that it's kind of sneaking up now,
Mhm.
especially as all these larger workplaces are doing RTO, return to office stuff. You'd think that people hearing about that would be like, oh, shoot, I better get my ducks in a row and show some productivity. But it has been popping up lately, which is surprising to me.
So, what kind of things do you feel like employers should be doing to, let's say, be proactive to try to prevent some of these people problems and HR legal issues? And I say try because they all aren't totally avoidable because people are people.
Yeah. I mean, analogy I use all the time is you can't stop somebody from running a red light and hitting you, right? There are rules in place, and if people ignore them, you
Right.
can't you can't make them follow the traffic laws. Same thing with HR and employment law. I mean, the first step in my book always, whenever we sign up a new client, is we send them out within that first week an employee handbook questionnaire. So, do you have one? If not, fill this out. Let's get you rolling, because employee handbooks are included with all our services, and we want to get that, to use another analogy, that solid foundation, for them to build, their HR compliance on. And once we know that they have the right policies and the necessary policies in place, and then we can start going from there in terms of saying, all right, well, Bob isn't, adhering to the remote work policy. What do we do? And then we look at the handbook, and we say, all right, these are your options for what to do with him. And so I think, in my opinion, for my 2 cents, the employee handbook is the foundation for all of that, to making sure that you know what the rules are, that you tell the employee what the rules are, and then
Mhm.
it's up to them to follow them or not, just
Yeah.
like red lights.
That's great advice. I know a lot of small business owners who lack those kind of tools. Is compliance with HR laws ever a major blocker for progress for your clients? I mean, especially so in this new world of work, distributed teams, contracted 1099 team members, a lot of that's the new normal. I guess employee misclassification and or even just retaining the right talent in the right way could be an obstacle for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I mean, was it just last summer? We went through the whole Fair Labor Standards Act exempt classification dance again, which was ultimately struck down by the courts. Um, and so there's always an issue with compliance in terms of exempt or not exempt employees. For example, this morning somebody asked me a question about deducting pay for exempt employees for missing a half day. And I understand if you don't understand the law, that seems fair. You didn't work a half a day, you don't get paid for that half a day. But under the Fair Labor Standards Act, you have to get paid for that. It becomes an employee discipline issue. Now, there are different ways to handle it. If you have vacation PTO, your policy might say we can deduct vacation PTO for half-day absences or absences over 1 hour. But then what happens if that person's out of vacation or PTO? What if their bank's empty?
Right.
At that point, can you deduct their pay? The answer is still no. You still have to go through the normal discipline process and counsel and coach that employee about what they are doing in terms of their leave. I've actually seen a couple issues pop up lately that said my employee has vacation left, but they just want to take an unpaid day. Is that cool? And theoretically, sure, but what does that do to your workplace? When you set your PTO vacation policy, you set aside a certain bank of time, right? You say, all right, we know that we can let these people be out for this many weeks and we can still hit our numbers, we can still be productive, we can still get things done. But then people start taking unpaid time, and all of a sudden they have unpaid time and paid time, and so instead of 3-4 weeks vacation, they're out 6 weeks. What happens to productivity? What happens to culture, morale, those team members who are playing by the rules and saying, you know what, I get 3 weeks of vacation, I'm only going to take 3 weeks, I'm not going to play this unpaid time off. Or maybe they can't take unpaid time off because they really need the money.
Right.
And so it's a question of equity and fairness at that point in terms of team morale. That's
That's really good insight. So how often do you see leadership actually as the major blocker to progress for your clients, or the reason why these businesses come to my HR counsel to begin with?
Leadership usually isn't the problem. They usually see us as a way to solve problems. I know HR is generally seen as a cost center,
Yeah.
and it certainly can be a cost center, but I
Mhm.
think there's a way to leverage HR and legal in a way to not only make it not a cost center, but to improve culture and to improve morale. Was it Ronald Reagan phrase? I'm from the government and I'm here to help. It's kind of like I'm from HR and I'm here to help. Um, you know, there's some really, really talented HR people out there,
Yeah.
and if they have the tools that they need to succeed and thrive, they can push the company forward. Because if you have, for example, discipline and discharge. I am against PIPs the way they are normally used. My wife is probably sick of me hearing this, but I say focus on the I on a PIP, performance improvement plan. Focus on the improvement, because it costs so much to attract talent. It costs so much to train talent. It costs so much when that talent is not there. You got opportunity cost of things you can't do anymore.
Yeah.
You've got, the burden on the rest of the staff that is, quote unquote, left behind, that has to pick up the slack for that employee that's gone. So if you have somebody that's qualified that can do the job, I mean, I'm not saying never put anybody on a PIP, but if you're going to put somebody on a PIP, don't do it as a precursor to termination. Do it so that you can save, quote unquote, save that employee,
Right.
rehabilitate that employee, and make them a productive member of the team. There's a reason they were hired in the first place. And generally that's because they had the skills to do the essential functions of the job. And so people don't just turn bad. What happens is policies are lax in terms of enforcement. Um, Managers are sometimes scared to confront.
Yeah.
maybe there's not a formal program for how managers are supposed to do performance management.
Right.
Or maybe the manager was promoted from, an individual contributor and doesn't understand how to be a manager. All of
Which
these
happens a lot.
things
Yeah.
play a huge role, in terms of that. And so if you let HR get involved strategically instead of reactively, you can head off a lot of these issues and you end up saving, it's hard to say, well, I saved that employee from getting fired. So, you can't, where do you put that on the balance sheet? You don't, but there's a real value to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's indisputable. Let's talk about the business leaders who are nailing it. I mean, beyond the legal compliance, being proactive, are there common personality traits or soft skills or other competencies you see with folks that are leading high performing teams or organizations you admire?
Yeah. I think that servant leaders, in my opinion, are really great, especially at the maybe not at the exact top, but towards the top. People that understand that their team needs to grow, it needs to change, and provides them with the opportunities and tools to either explore their interests and grow in that area, or to
Mhm.
finally come to the realizations that, what, ticking and tying PTO on payroll is not my thing.
Right.
I'd prefer to get more in terms of the coaching and development, or what, maybe I want to go. Maybe HR isn't my thing, or maybe I want to try marketing. And I think that organizations that allow their people to kind of explore those different areas only set themselves up for success in the long
Totally
run.
agree. Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, what do you think are some non-legal factors you see separating companies that, consistently execute and drive success from those that, flounder?
Employee empathy. So understanding where employees are coming from and understanding that employees are not, robots or
Yeah,
automatons or a number. Um, so I guess that's, just caring about your employees. Now,
that's big.
on a certain level, that isn't feasible everywhere, right? If you're running a widget factory and you've got 1,000 people on the line, on one hand you've got to make numbers, but on the other hand, if Bob gets a repetitive use injury on the line, why is he getting this injury? Is he going to be okay? You got to worry about work comp, and
Yeah,
so uh, that all gives you an opportunity to say, why are we doing things this way? Is there something we could do to prevent these injuries? Maybe it's not even necessarily um, at the individual level, but in terms of a class, like we don't want all our widget makers to come down with shoulder tendonitis. Is there something better that we can do to care for these employees and their livelihood?
yeah. I love that. And I'm kind of curious. So like my HR counsel, it does have a layer of technology to it, right? Are you seeing any interesting changes in how companies are using or leveraging software to support these people or operations to maintain, or even maintain compliance?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm kind of I don't know, I'm tech curious. So I have automated our employee handbook system. There's an online questionnaire, and it helps me cut down drafting time tremendously. I just spend hours and hours on a single employee handbook, and I've got it down. I've cut out all the fat. So it's down to the bare minimum that I can do while still giving a quality handbook that's legally backed. Um, I have had people talk to me about ChatGPT. I have tried ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, in terms of asking legal questions, and they're smart. They're like, we can't give you legal advice, but
They hallucinate.
if you switch up how you word it, I've still, you can get around it a little bit.
Hmm.
And I don't think from a legal perspective we have a ton to be worried about right now.
Okay.
Um, I have a Westlaw product that's specifically for lawyers with AI.
Hmm.
And I asked it a question the other day, and I was like, "That's not right. You don't understand." So there's some those. I guess those are my caveats up front. Is that you know there are hallucinations. There are things that it can't do. Um, but there are things that AI does extremely well. I had to write an email a month ago, and it's like, I don't want to write this email. You know, I don't know. I was like, I have an idea of where I want it to go, but I didn't want to phrase it. And so I spat it into one of the generators, and it was like, you know what? That's pretty good. It probably saved me 5 minutes, but and I had to tweak it a little bit, but I was like, you know what? That's good. I like it. You know,
Yeah.
so I think that companies right now, the ones I'm dealing with, because they're still smaller, and they don't have the scale to have like huge in-house AI dedicated machines yet,
Right.
are using them more for, I guess, mundane tasks as opposed to um, really deep learning stuff. I mean, I used it the other day to write an Excel formula. I don't do Excel, I do Word. My wife does Excel. She was busy, and so I ran into, I think it was Copilot. It's like, Microsoft should know this. And I said, write me, I want to, if then. It was a giant if then, and it was going to take me an hour, and I was done in 5 minutes, and it was great.
I mean, that's definitely one of the advantages. Do you ever see tech getting organizations actually like in trouble legally? I mean, do you have any tips on how to avoid those issues?
Yeah, I've seen it. There are cases, and the ones I can think of off the top of my head have to do with ATS, applicant
Hmm.
tracking systems.
Okay.
So when you go on and you apply for a job online, it asks you, what year you were born.
Ah.
Um, and there was a couple of them that were automatically excluding. One guy, the first case I remember, the guy was like 80 something years old. Um, and so the birth dates only went back to like 1940 or something like that. And he was older than that. And so he couldn't apply because he couldn't put in his birth date. And so he said it was discrimination. And the EEOC said yes. And they, filed a complaint, and the employer settled because the ATS, you know, rejected him because he was too old.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. And
Microsoft,
such an easy tech fix too.
right? There's another one that came back about a year ago. I don't remember the exact, but it was real similar in terms of it was rejecting people over. It was either, yeah, it was based upon age. And Microsoft and Amazon. I don't know if you saw this. This is probably about 5, 6 years ago. Both got in trouble for using AI. I'm going to mix the two up in my head, but one of them was using, like on a video, when they would do video conferencing for applicants, they would have AI read the emotions of, the facial
Hmm.
recognition software would say, all right, he looks angry or he looks happy. And it turned out that it was unfairly um, applying negative emotions to Black people. And so they got in a whole bunch of trouble for that. I believe that was the Microsoft case. And Amazon got in trouble for using AI to sift and winnow their applications. And so what happened is they were looking for programmers, coders,
Mhm.
and somebody applied from an all women's college, and she was immediately rejected because what happened is the AI went through and it said, all right, these are all our top performers at Amazon. This is what they all have in common. And they went to these schools, and none of them were all women's schools because coding, tends to be a male dominated field. And so
Yeah.
they felt because she went to this all women's, the AI felt, if it can feel, it mathed that because she went to this, all women's college that wasn't really represented at all on their list of successful employees, that she was rejected, even though she was completely qualified.
Wow. That's frankly remarkable. I did not know of those instances, but that's crazy to think. So, um, tell me a story about a team, or maybe like a client that you worked with that had, a major people breakthrough or breakdown for that matter. Potential client. I mean, you don't need to obviously name names, but I'm really curious to hear um, about, sort of a pivotal moment that had to do with some HR, legal HR related activity.
That's a great question. I'm kind of drawing a blank right now, to be honest. So let me think about this one for a second.
I know that. So a lot of times, when at least what I find, leaders, team members, you made an interesting comment, and when people, when you bring on new clients, you send them this questionnaire, right? Do you have a handbook, right? So there's a lot of small businesses that are totally unprepared for certain things that come up, and a lot of that might because they lack certain tools or guardrails or whatnot, right? And so I've seen organizations, who, when they pivot to a really more well-defined and focused, HR related strategy, that their culture improves significantly. I've seen other cases where they try to do things and then half their team leaves because they've created this environment of, feels like heavy policing.
Hmm.
And I'm really kind of curious, have you ever seen any of these instances where some all of a sudden just shot through the roof and others where it was like a complete disaster?
Uh, I'm trying I don't think I've seen any completely flame out. I have seen obviously clients when there's change, employees and people sometimes are resistant or scared of change.
Yeah.
And so people will self-select out as opposed to staying. I haven't seen anything where like the entire marketing quit because they're sick of this new PTO policy or something like that. I have had, I mean, but that is a significant whenever you start talking about benefits and pay, and whenever you start changing vacation policies and PTO policies from the old system to the new system, a lot of people, especially those that have been there for a while, are like, uh, you know, against it because, this is what I was promised. But
Yeah.
everyone's everyone's an employee at will, except for those of you who have people in Montana, which means that you can be hired and fired at any time for any reason, for no reason, for bad reason, for a wrong reason, as long as it's not, discriminatory or otherwise prohibited by law.
Yeah.
And so I think the real opportunities for a ship to go on the rocks is not managing those change moments where you're changing a big part of a benefit package. And companies survive this all the time. My wife used to work at Rockwell Automation, and they had a pension plan.
Mhm.
Before she started, they had a pension plan. And people that have been there for a while are still on the pension plan. Pension plans are incredibly costly.
Yeah.
You got to put that money away. You got to sock that money away, as opposed to, a defined contribution plan like a 401k. Those are much more cost effective for employers. And obviously, I mean, I can think of maybe two, I don't know, maybe 10 employers that I have that still have pension plans as clients.
Mm.
And, I've got like 12,000, 14,000 clients that, subscribe to MyHRCounsel. So it used to be the thing. Everyone had a pension plan and everyone managed the change. And so the key, I guess, doesn't really answer your question, but the key moment there is that you need to have strong change management skills in order to not flame out or not lose entire teams.
Yeah. I think that's probably the big lesson uh, there. Just to provoke some future focused thinking, what do you think's coming down the pike in terms of legislation and new regulations in the workplace? What do you expect to see?
I did a couple webinars on this year already. I did one right after the inauguration. I think I did another one in March, and I was completely wrong on everything so far. Um, so
Maybe
let's
the
see.
third time's the charm.
let's see if my track record will stay straight, because I did say there's no way either the House or the Senate passes the no tax on tips bill, and the Senate passed it already. So that one's out. Uh, that one will be interesting. Um, I can't believe the Senate passed it when the Senate is currently holding up the was it the One Big Beautiful Bill Act or whatever it is, because of money, because that's a huge revenue source, taxes on tips, uh, and they
Yeah.
also talked about taxes on overtime.
Hmm.
Will that eventually happen? I'm still going to say no. I'm going to stick to my guns, even though the Senate passed it. I don't know if the House will, and I don't know what happens in the House with that.
You had mentioned, 12, 14,000, subscribers or clients to my HR Counsel. How do you see your work evolving as companies and specifically even, small businesses or small to medium sized businesses get more intentional about their people and their culture in the workplace and adopting new technology?
Yeah, I think my role is to act kind of like, the bumpers on a bowling alley to keep them out of the gutter, to make sure that they don't go, you know, and do something that is going to get them into legal hot water down the road.
Mhm.
Um, I never tell a client that they can't do something. I mean, I tell them that it'd be illegal if they do it, and it would be my suggestion that they don't do it, because everyone gets to make their own business decisions, right? They're the ones that get to sign on the dotted line. I can tell them advice, I can give them options, and so what I like to do, as new technology evolves and as new things come to pass, is like, all right, this is what's happening, these are your options. Similar to when they raised or tried to raise the exemption for salary level. You know,
Mm,
your options are to raise employee salary, change them to hourly, whatever. And is there one answer? There's never one right answer that's going to
right.
apply to all my clients or any company in the world. Um, and every company is going to have to do that balancing test, the cost benefit analysis. What makes sense for us? What doesn't make sense for us?
Right. So, what do you give me an idea here? What's a common, maybe like a legal misconception that really persists, I guess, for business leaders? Do you see a common thread?
I mean, I'm going to jump back to the first thing we talked about, is like one of the things we see most is FMLA.
Yeah.
Um, and what a lot of people don't understand is that once an employee has exhausted his or her or their FMLA leave, that's not the end of the story. You don't get to fire them because they aren't back within their 12 weeks. At that point, you also have other hurdles that you have to jump over in terms of the ADA. Do they need an accommodation? Is unpaid leave an accommodation that's available to that employee? And would it be an undue hardship?
Mm,
Um, and it depends on what state they're in. I believe the Seventh Circuit doesn't like that. But I think every other circuit in the country is okay with, that sort of thing. And people just think, like, all right, 12 weeks and then we're done. It's not. We're not done after 12 weeks. There's other things you got to consider.
I yeah, I mean, and that's really good advice. If you could give, I like to bring up this scenario. If you could give a piece of advice to a business leader, right, who's trying to really just get it right with their people. Let's say you have an opportunity, you got like, 15, 30 seconds, right? You're both on a plane exiting the jetway. They grab their bag. They're about to walk down the thing and they just ask you, what do I need to do to get it right from day one? What's your advice? What's the one thing you tell
I'm telling them two things. Number one, have an employee handbook. Um,
them? Good.
it's a good foundation, right? And number two, be consistent with your enforcement. Um, because what drives litigation is employees being felt like they're being treated unfairly. If
Yeah.
employees think they're being treated unfairly, if they don't understand the reason for a decision or termination or whatever, they're going to connect dots in their own head, and they're going to say it must have been because I'm Polish and I'm from South Milwaukee. No, the reason is because you showed up late to work 12 days in a row, you know. But if you don't communicate and if you don't apply policies consistently, the employees are kind of left wondering, and that's where you can get into trouble with lawsuits or EEOC or state equivalent claims, when you can head those off at the pass just by just being consistent and having solid communication down the road.
I mean, that's great advice just to build solid culture to begin with, is that consistency and reinforcing those positive values, and how everybody is really, I think, held to the same standard when that stuff breaks down. I mean, that's a quick trip to having things fall apart pretty quickly. So Andrew, man, thank you so much for this chat, for this conversation. A lot of amazing legal insights, and I want everybody to visit MyHRCounsel because it's a pretty incredible ship you run. So
Thank you,
thanks again.
Curtis.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. Share this episode with a friend or teammate or even your boss. Check out mustardhub.com to see how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. Until next time, bye now.